Good afternoon, everyone. We're now in Judges chapter 15. Now, I'd like to do a little bit of review because from chapter 14 onwards, we are beginning to see the scheme of Samson. Oftentimes, when we read through this event regarding Samson, we may not be quite aware of what plans he is hatching. And we always just remember some of the key highlights. So today, by way of review, let's look at chapter 14 very quickly. And chapter 14 begins by talking about Samson wanting to go down to Timnah, and he wanted to marry a woman in Timnah, and she was a daughter of the Philistines, and asked the parents, the father and the mother, to get her as a wife. At the onset, if we are reading this on the surface, you would think that Samson is getting a bit crazy here. But if you understand the background of Samson, we are now at the time when they are under the Philistines' control. And Samson is supposed to be one who is going to be the hero of the plot for this period for about 20 years. Later, we'll see. Now, what is interesting is that uh, for this period, Samson is not quite realizing as a regular judge. No, not like Devorah, not like some of the other judges where they would lead uh, a resurgence of obedience to God, and it all becomes a national repentance, and they would follow God very faithfully for a period of time. Now, when it came to Samson, it was a one man show. And we begin by seeing that he wanted to do something crazy to marry a daughter of the Philistines. And chapter 14 talks about that. And so I want to point our attention that all of the actions of Samson is to instigate a reason to fight the Philistines, but not on a national scale, but on an individual scale, meaning Samson would be the only one prominent that the Philistines will recognize that he is going against the entire nation of the Philistines and not the other uh, Israelites. That in itself needs to be at the back of our mind. The reason why he actually got the daughters of the Philistine to be wife is to find a reason to fight the Philistines. We also read in chapter 14, after the marriage, uh, he was in a celebratory mood, and he gave a riddle with a bet. And it was a very costly bet that if the Philistines are not able to to tell the answer, they are to pay a lot of there's a heavy price for it. And so they worked on the wife to get the answer so that the Philistine young man can actually answer Samson. And they did. And so Samson, in turn, was given this unusual strength by God. And so we read, like in verse 19, and the wind of God. You see it as a wind because you don't know what actually entered into Samson, but you could see that something happened, that he had strength that was beyond normal, abnormal strength. He went down to Ashkelon, killed 30 of their men, took their apparel, and paid for the riddle. And so his anger was aroused, and then he went back up to his father's house. Now, what we need to now understand is the father's house, or Samson's father's house, was at the peak. Timnath was somewhere in the middle. Ashkelon was at the base. And so he went up to the father's house, but he went up alone. And so I just want to highlight that Samson's wife was given to his companion, who has been his, well, I won't say his best man, but a very good friend. I won't say it is his best man, but a very good friend. And so now there was a publicly known adultery. So I want to use this as a background because this background of adultery being very public gives Samson a reason to act against the Philistines. We begin from verse 1. After a while, we don't know how long, could be a few days, could be a few weeks, but it was then in the time of the wheat harvest, sometime in the May, June timeframe, and Samson had decided to visit his wife with a young goat. Now, I want to point out to you that this word visit is not as simple as visit, because this word comes from the word that was used in the Ten Commandments, that God will visit the third and the fourth generation in Exodus chapter 20. And this word is pada. It gives us a connotation that pada gives us an imagery of somebody who is overseeing a situation, and it warrants this person to go and attend to the situation. And by attending to the situation, you can call it a visit, you can call it a punishment, or you can call it a care. But basically, it is to attend in a positive way or in a negative way, but to attend and to come to visit. And that is okay. So he came to visit his wife with a young goat. Now, we don't know if Samson already knew that his wife was already committing adultery with his best friend, right? With a friend. But regardless, understand at the back of Samson's mind is he is looking for a public excuse to act on his anger towards the Philistines, to teach the Philistines a lesson. And so, with the young goat, and then Samson said to the father, he went down to the wife's father, and he says, let me go into my wife, into her room. This is an indication that he is seeking to consummate, because he went home alone after the wedding feast. He wanted to consummate with the wife, he wanted to go into the inner room. But then the father would not permit him to go in. And the father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her, and therefore I gave her to your friend. Well, her younger sister is better, isn't it? Go take her instead. Now, this is, I would say, Samson's way of setting things up for a recourse, for a very public recourse. In verse 3, it reads, "And then Samson said to them, 'This time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them.'" They He went first in chapter 4 to 30 of them in Ashkelon to take their garments, right? And that's because of the bet that he seemingly had lost, because they got the wife to entice him to tell the answer. But this time round, it will be very public. Previously, he would not be able to prove that his wife was part of the scheme. But now, nobody can deny that he has been shortchanged. He has been violated. His wife was committing adultery with his friend. It's a very public knowledge. And so Samson went and caught 300 foxes. First of all, understand, to catch 300 foxes, it is not humanly possible. And so we find that this is a divine provision, that Samson somehow find a way to get 300 foxes. But it was at a time of the wheat harvest, a time where you can now cut the harvest. And to inflict the greatest pain to the Philistines is to destroy their harvest. And so what he did was, and then he took torches of fire. He paired the foxes tail to tail, tied them up together, and put a torch of fire between a pair of tails. Understand that these torches is fire torches. Now, when you get two foxes tail to tail, the foxes will be running, but they will be not running fast like they were alone. And so with their tails tied to each other, they went round the wheat harvest, and he set the torches on fire and let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, burn up both the shocks and the standing grains, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. The 300 foxes destroyed the harvest. Now, this is a huge pain that he has inflicted upon the Philistines. Verse 6, and then the Philistines asked, "Who has done this?" Recognize that this is looking for a person, not a nation. And so it is important that throughout chapters 14, 15, and 16, you find that all of that has to do with Samson alone. He kept it very strictly that the Philistines only saw him and not the rest of the people of Israel. And then they answered, "It's Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companions." And that's why he upset Samson, and Samson is the problem. And so the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. This is a public execution. And this public execution is done by the Philistines. See, all of this is a set up to give Samson a chance to deal harshly with the Philistines, but to be seen by the Philistines that it was him and him alone who did all these things. So Samson said to them, since you would do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you, and after that, I will cease. What did he do? Revenge on you means what? Revenge on the fact that his wife was killed and the father with her. And this public execution is of Samson's family. And because of that, in verse 8, and then he went to attack them. Well, this word says hip and thigh. We'll come back to this. With a great slaughter, and then he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Now, this is a very interesting, I guess you could say, an idiom. The hip and the thigh. In fact, this would be the calf. The calf and the thigh. And it depicts both the rider, uh, the rider and the footmen. Meaning these are the Philistines who rode horses or went on foot. And he went and killed many of them. He killed many of them. And this time round, he didn't go back to his father's house. So notice, how do we know? He went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Etam. In this way, he avoided any conflict with the father. Now, interestingly, you find that the fact that Samson went to avenge, notice it says he went to avenge on the wife and on the father. Remember, the Philistines came to burn the wife and the father wasn't because there was an adultery. They didn't recognize that as adultery. They allowed that to happen in the community. It was because they 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 went. The father gave the wife to a friend and caused Samson to go and destroy all their harvests and burn them up. And so, in the anger of the Philistines, they burned up the father and the daughter. It was, I guess, an expression of an anger, right? An expression of anger, not so much as the adultery. Verse 9. And then the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and deployed themselves against Lehi. Now, this is, I guess you can say that this word Lehi is a place in Judah. Now, Judah is at a higher plane. So Judah is at a higher plane than where the Philistines lie. The Philistines' lands are usually at the coastal. And so when you went further inland, the land would be higher, and so they went up. But they encamped in Judah and they came to a place called Lehi. Lehi means jawbone. Samson was staying in a place called Etam. We don't really know where Etam, but it is likely to be near Lehi. And then the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? Why are you fighting us? And then they answered, we have come to arrest Samson. Now, this idea of arrest Samson in verse 10 basically says they want to, this word arrest uh, is to bind, to bind, to imprison, is to catch him. But arrest is a very modern word. They just want to go and get hold of Samson and tie him up, and then to do to him as he has done to us. How can they do that? I mean, practically, Samson went to kill them, yes, the second time. And the first time he went to burn all their crops. And so they are so upset with Samson. Now, what is going to happen is this is the time where the Philistines are engaging with the people of Judah, but not to fight them. Understand, at this point in time, the Philistines is ruling or have the power over the people of Israel. Verse 11. Now, verse 11 says this. First of all, after the Philistines came up to Judah to ask them to look for Samson, we now see that, and then 3,000 of the men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam, and they found Samson. Now, if 3,000 men of Judah went to see Samson, we can safely assume that more than 3,000 men of the Philistines came to Judah. That would be a lot and a lot of people to come against Judah to look for Samson. And so the land is still under the rule of the Philistines, meaning they have to ask the Philistines for permission to do many things, and the Philistines is taxing them and taking things away from them under the subjection of the Philistines. So now the Judahites did not want to fight the Philistines. And so in turn, they went to Samson and asked Samson, do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? This word rule over us means have dominion. Remember, this is part of the 40 years that the Philistines is ruling over us. They have dominion. We have to answer to them. We have to pay them. What is this you have done to us? What does this mean is that when they have dominion, they are to listen to the Philistines. And if the Philistines are not happy, they will come and punish us. And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. This is fair play. Right? This is fair play. It is a tit for a tat. This is a modern day idea. But the idea is Samson is merely saying, I am doing it, not Judah. Hold me responsible. So they have done things to me, to my father-in-law, to my wife, and I have done to them as well. They burned my father-in-law and my wife. I went to destroy them. This is a fair play. Verse 12, but they said to him, the men of Judah, 3,000 of these men of Judah, said to him, we have come down to bind you that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. And then Samson said to them, in verse 12, he says, swear. Now, this word swear is make an oath. Make an oath. And in this oath is by Jehovah. This means that they are held to the oath. They must honor the oath. And the oath that Samson wants them to do is that you will not kill me yourselves, that you just hand me over to the Philistines. And then they spoke to him, saying, no, we will only tie you securely, bind you up, and give you into their hand, but we will surely not kill you. And so they are making this oath that they will not kill Samson. And they tied him up with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. In verse 14, they brought him up to Lehi, the jawbone. The Philistines, many of them, more than 3,000 definitely, they came and they shouted against him. Now, this is important because this idea of shouting is to raise a battle cry. Now, the interesting thing is this: they raise a battle cry against him and him alone, not against the people of Judah. This was Samson's plan, not to get the people of Judah involved, but only himself. And then the wind of the Lord came mightily upon him. Now remember, we talk about the wind of the Lord. Each time you see the wind of the Lord, wind of Jehovah, essentially is to see, right? You see Samson, and he displayed extraordinary ability of strength. So they call this the wind of Jehovah. You can't actually see what went into him, but you could see the effects of the wind, that all of a sudden Samson had such incredible strength. And this is what it means by mightily. Very strongly, he got strength. And then the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire. What does that mean? The idea of flax is the fiber used for linen, very strong by itself. But when it's burned with fire, it becomes very brittle. And then his bonds broke loose from his hands. So what actually happened is this: the ropes that were tying him up, and ropes being very thick, are now seen as burnt flax, brittle. Now, why is it brittle? Because this is the visibility. This is visible. Became means seen as if flax burned with fire, very brittle. And suddenly, it says here, broke loose from his hands. I guess you could use this word, the word saying that the bonds melted, which means that it came loose without an effort. There was no trying so hard to tear it apart. It just came off like melted butter. It just dissipated. It just became, I guess the word here is melt away. It became liquefied, something that is no longer there. Verse 15. Now, verse 15 is, we missed the and then. And then What it means is after he broke loose, after all these ropes kind of just fell apart, he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey. He reached out his hand and took it and killed 1,000 men with it. Now, this word here is that he found. The idea of finding means he detected, he saw right next to him somehow when he looked around, he saw a fresh jawbone. The jawbone is lehi. This whole place, lehi, is about jawbone. He found a lehi of a donkey. He reached out his hand. Now, this would be another divine incident that suddenly there was a jawbone so conveniently found by him nearby. He took it and he used it to kill 1,000 men with it. Now, there were 3,000 men of Judah. There must have been more than 3,000 men of the Philistines because the men of Judah would not fight the Philistines if they were encountering a huge number. And here, a one-man show with a jawbone killed 1,000 men with it. And then Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, the lehi of the donkey, then it is heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. Now, what did he mean is this? The jawbone of the donkey, heap upon heap. You find that Hamor is a donkey. The idea of a heap of dirt is also Hamor. Hamor. And both have the same sound. Both have the same sound. Which means that the heap called Hamor is like a donkey equivalent. And that in itself is to rub salt into the wound of the Philistines. I killed the 1,000 men. The 1,000 men is all heaped up and is using the bone of a donkey. And so the heap of men are like donkeys, basically. Right? I've slain 1,000 men in the heap like a donkey. Verse 17. And so it was. And then so it was, when he had finished speaking, he threw the jawbone from his hand and called that place Ramat Lehi. Now, Ramat Lehi has a meaning. The meaning is jawbone hill. It is a hill that he used the jawbone of a donkey to slay 1,000 men. Now, this in an episode is to have a play with words concerning the lehi, the jawbone. It is a play of words using the word hamor, that means donkey, as well as a heap of dirt, right? As well as a heap of dirt. Verse 18. And then, after killing 1,000 men, he became very thirsty. And then he cried out to the Lord, and then he said, you have given me this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. You gave me the strength to kill 1,000 men. And now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised? And by uncircumcised, it will be the Philistines. Now, look at it this way. He is presenting his case from how people would look at God. That these people, the Philistines, they had lost 1,000 men by Samson. And obviously, they want to catch Samson. Now, if Samson dies or falls into the hands of the Philistines because of thirst, this is so strange because without fighting, the Philistines would be able to arrest Samson. After killing 1,000, that would be an anticlimax. They would laugh at God. And so it is very much an appeal to God. How can you let this happen? You have shown a display of incredible might through the hand of Samson, killing 1,000 Philistines. And then the Philistines can come and arrest Samson by not fighting at all because he is now so weak because he is so thirsty. Now, God listened to him, verse 19. Verse 19 is, and then God split the hollow place that is in Lehi. Now, I would tend to see this that there is a place in Lehi that is of a rock that may have a little hollow, right? A little hollow. Now, I guess it is the idea of this a hole, right? A hole. And in this hole, God opened it up and outflowed water. Outflowed water. And then he drank. And then his spirit returned. And then he revived. And there's a lot of and thens here. So, and then God split the hollow place that is in Lehi. And then water came out after the hollow place is split. Now, split here literally break open, right? Break open. And then water came out. And then as water came out, he drank. And then after he drank, his spirit returned. And then he revived. Revive means alive. He has the spirit again. No, that's what it means. His spirit returned. Did his spirit go away? No. His wind returned. When he was so thirsty, he was so frail, he was so weak. It is as if that his wind left him. Now that he drank water, his wind came back and he is alive. How do you display alive in Hebrew? He is able to move, he has strength to walk, he can stand up, and he can fight again. That is what it means by revive. Therefore, he called its name En Hakkore. En Hakkore. That is in verse 19. En Hakkore is I guess you could say it's like En-gedi. En is a way to describe an eye, which is a spring, right? Which is a spring. The spring of Hakkore. Uh, the idea of Hakkore means uh, he called. He called to God. And when he called to God, God opened up the rock and a spring came out. So this is En Hakore, which is in Lehi until this day of writing. And then it ends by telling us this. And then Samson judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So, sometime in the period of the Philistines, and the Philistines ruled for 40 years after he displayed an ability to kill 1,000 people of the Philistines did not come to disturb them for a while because they were so shocked that one man in Judah can kill 1,000 men of the Philistines. And it was just too much for the Philistines to handle. And so the Philistines backed off. Now, backing off doesn't mean giving peace to Israel. It literally means that, well, they stayed away, being very apprehensive. They are watching closely, but still, the dominion of the land is still under the Philistines. Now, please bear in mind that this whole period will continue into First Samuel. That is part and parcel of the 40 years in the hands of the Philistines. And so we are only looking at a very short window with a couple of highlights of the life of Samson, where in this particular instance of a judge, Samson was not raising national awareness and repentance, but rather he is now seen to rule Israel under the watchful eyes of the Philistines, that the Philistines dare not come, knowing that there is such a powerful troublemaker called Samson. Now, in chapter 16, moving on, you find that we are recording a period towards the end of the life of Samson. So there will be a period between chapter 15 and chapter 16. And with that, we come to the end of our session today.